3 weeks ago, at my daughter's high school graduation ceremony, my husband stood up in the middle of the principal's speech, pointed at me across the crowded auditorium, and shouted, "I've had enough of your lies. I'm leaving you, and everyone here should know why." No warning, no private conversation, just a public execution of my character in front of hundreds of people, including our daughter on what should have been her proudest day. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was seeing the satisfied smirk on his mother's face as she nodded in approval like I deserved this humiliation. While the entire audience sat frozen in shocked silence, I calmly reached into my purse and pulled out something that made my husband's face turn ghostly white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, I'm Vanessa, and welcome to my story. What time are you watching this, and from where? Drop a comment below because I read them all. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't explode out of nowhere. They build quietly, day by day, until they break you, or until they think they have. Spring in Lakewood always feels more charged than the rest of Massachusetts. Maybe it's the way the cherry blossoms burst into color after months of snow, or how the air carries a hint of possibility mixed with the scent of freshly cut grass. I arrived at Lakewood High School's graduation ceremony at exactly 4:30 p.m., parking my modest sedan 3 rows behind my husband Daniel's gleaming black luxury SUV, the one he insisted on leasing last year despite our daughter Zoe's looming. College tuition. I wore a navy blue dress I'd saved for special occasions, my hair pulled back in a simple updo. In my purse was a handwritten letter to Zoe, something I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting, words of wisdom and love from a mother. Watching her only child step into adulthood. A precious moment, I thought. A memory we'd all cherish forever. The auditorium lights dimmed just as I slipped into my reserved seat in the front row, designated for parents of honor students. Daniel was already seated, his mother Elaine beside, him in a designer outfit that seemed excessive even for a graduation. Neither acknowledged my arrival with more than a curt nod. I'd grown accustomed to this cold war of subtle exclusion, but today wasn't about me or us. It was about Zoe. "You're cutting it close?" Daniel whispered, eyes fixed straight ahead at the empty stage. "Traffic on Maple was backed up," I replied softly, though I'd actually spent the extra minutes sitting in the parking lot, practicing deep breathing exercises my therapist had recommended. Elaine leaned forward, peering around Daniel. "Some of us managed to arrive with plenty of time to spare." Her voice carried just enough for nearby parents to hear, a few turning their heads slightly. I focused on the program in my hands, running my finger over Zoe's name listed among the honor graduates. Summa cum laude. Despite everything happening at home, she'd maintained perfect grades. My heart swelled with pride, even as it ached with worry about what might come after today. The ceremony began with the traditional pomp and circumstance as the graduates filed in, each face beaming with accomplishment and anticipation. I spotted Zoe immediately, her posture straight, her smile wide but nervous. She found us in the crowd, and I gave her a small wave. She waved back, but her eyes darted anxiously between Daniel and me. She knew something was wrong. Children always do, no matter how careful you are with your words, how quiet your arguments, how practiced your fake smiles. Principal Harmon approached the podium, welcoming everyone to the milestone event. I settled into my seat, feeling a momentary peace wash over me. For the next hour, I could just be Zoe's mom, watching her achievement, nothing else. The family. Drama could wait. "Today we celebrate not just academic achievement," Harmon began, "but character, perseverance, and integrity, qualities that will serve these young people long after they leave our halls." Integrity. The word echoed in my mind. If only he knew what was happening in the front row, just feet from where he stood. If only he could see the text messages I'd discovered 3 months ago, the bank statements I'd found last week, The conversation I'd overheard yesterday between Daniel and Elaine, but I'd made a promise to myself. Not today. Today was for Zoe. I felt Daniel shift beside me, his breathing becoming more rapid. I glanced over and noticed his right leg bouncing anxiously, his hands gripping the program so tightly it crumpled at the edges. Something was wrong, more wrong than usual. "Are you okay?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Elaine reached over and patted his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. Whatever she said didn't help. His face flushed deeper red. Principal Harmon continued his speech, talking about the bright futures awaiting the graduates. "These students have shown us that honesty and hard work form the foundation of real success." That's when it happened. Daniel suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. All eyes turned toward the disruption. I reached for his arm, but he jerked away. "I can't do this," he hissed, loud enough for the first several rows to hear. Principal Harmon paused mid-sentence, looking our way with confusion. In that suspended moment, I thought Daniel might simply walk out. That would have been embarrassing enough. Instead, he turned to face the audience, pointing directly at me, his voice rising to fill the entire auditorium. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've had enough of your lies. I'm leaving you, and everyone here should know why. The room went silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on us. On me. From the stage, I could see Zoe's face, horror-stricken, her hand covering her mouth. My heart shattered for her. "Daniel, please," I whispered. "Not here. Not now." But he was beyond reason. 15 years I've stayed. 15 years of her manipulation, her deceit, her controlling everything. His voice cracked with emotion that seemed almost rehearsed. "She's turned our daughter against me. She's hidden money. She's made me look like the villain while pretending to be the perfect wife and mother." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw phones being raised, recording the meltdown. This would be on social media within minutes. Zoe's special day, immortalized as the time her father publicly humiliated her mother. Principal Harmon approached the microphone. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you—" "No!" Daniel cut him off. "Everyone needs to know what kind of woman she really is. Ask her about the money. Ask her about the secret account." From the corner of my eye, I saw Elaine's satisfied smile. This wasn't spontaneous rage. This was planned. Their planned ambush. On the day they knew would hurt not just me, but Zoe the most. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not humiliation, but clarity, crystal clear, ice-cold clarity. I'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it was coming. While Daniel continued his tirade, I calmly opened my purse. My hands didn't shake. My breathing remained steady. I pulled out a sealed envelope, not the letter I'd written for Zoe, but something else entirely. I stood slowly, the envelope held between two fingers. Daniel's rant faltered as he noticed it. "What is that?" he demanded, voice suddenly uncertain. I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned to face Principal Harmon. "I apologize for this disruption. My husband is under significant stress. Would it be possible to have security escort him and his mother out so the ceremony can continue for the students who worked so hard for this day?" My calm, measured tone seemed to surprise everyone, especially Daniel. His face drained of color as he stared at the envelope in my hand. "You wouldn't," he whispered. I met his gaze steadily. "I didn't want to, not today, but you've made your choice." Two security guards approached, gently but firmly indicating that Daniel and Elaine should come with them. Daniel looked around wildly, suddenly aware of his audience, of the phone's recording, of our daughter watching from the stage with tears streaming down her face. "This isn't over," he hissed as he allowed himself to be led toward the exit. Actually, I said quietly, just for him to hear. Izzy. I returned to my seat as Principal Harmon apologized to the graduates and audience, smoothly redirecting the ceremony back to its rightful focus, the students. I sat alone in the front row, back straight, eyes forward, determined not to let my tears fall until I was somewhere private. After the ceremony, I found Zoe backstage, surrounded by concerned friends. When she saw me, she broke away and ran into my arms. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder. I held her tight. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing." "But Dad made his choice," I finished. "Today is about you and your incredible accomplishment. I am so, so proud of you." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. What was in the envelope? The one that made Dad look so scared? I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, just as I'd done since she was small. "Evidence," I said simply. "The truth I've been gathering for months. But that's for another day. Right now, we're going to celebrate you." And we did. We went to, dinner with her friends as planned, laughed, took photos, and created memories that wouldn't be defined by Daniel's outburst. I made sure of it. Later that night, after Zoe had gone to bed exhausted but feeling loved, I sat on our back porch, staring at the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. My phone had been buzzing nonstop with texts and calls from Daniel, from Elaine, from friends who'd witnessed the scene or heard about it. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened a different envelope, the one containing the letter I'd written for Zoe. I read it again, tracing my fingers over the words of love and wisdom I'd poured onto the page. Then I set it aside and pulled out my laptop. It was time to write a different kind of letter, one I'd been composing in my head for months, but had hesitated to put into words. No more hesitation, no more fear, no more protecting someone who had just proven he cared nothing about protecting me or our daughter. As I typed, memories flooded back, moments I'd pushed aside, excused, or blamed myself for. The night 5 years ago when I'd found the first text message from Nancy in accounting, the strange credit card charges, the weekends he'd gone fishing, but returned without fish or photos, the way he'd gradually isolated me from my friends, criticized my appearance, questioned my parenting decisions in front of Zoe. I remembered the afternoon 3 months ago when I'd gone to our bank to deposit my teaching bonus and discovered the joint account balance was thousands lower than it should have been. The manager's uncomfortable expression as she explained that Daniel had opened a separate account last year, transferring funds regularly. When I asked for access, she explained gently that my name wasn't on it, but Elaine's was. That was the day something broke in me, not my heart, but the chains of doubt and self-blame I'd been carrying. I began documenting everything: bank statements, text messages, emails I'd found when backing up our family computer, conversations recorded legally, in our two-party consent state. The deed to a condo purchased 6 months ago under an LLC I traced back to Daniel and Elaine. Most damning of all, the prenuptial agreement Daniel claimed we'd signed, the one he'd waved in my face during arguments, the one he'd used to threaten me with financial ruin if I ever left. I'd finally demanded to see it last month. The signature wasn't mine, not even close. The forgery was amateur, nothing like my actual handwriting. When confronted, he'd claimed I was misremembering signing it 20 years ago. I'd almost believed him. Almost. But something stopped me from accepting his reality again. Instead, I'd taken the document to a lawyer friend who confirmed what I already knew. The signature was fake, the document inadmissible. I'd planned to wait until after Zoe's first semester at college to confront Daniel. I wanted her to settle into her new life, to feel secure before her family officially fractured. I'd been so careful, so patient, building my case quietly while maintaining the facade of our marriage. But Daniel had made his choice today. A public execution deserved a public response. I finished typing and hit save. Not send? Not yet. Tomorrow would be soon enough. Tonight was for processing, for breathing, for reclaiming my narrative. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. I considered ignoring it like the others, but something told me to read this one. You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy. I stared at the words, feeling an odd sense of calm. Yes, I had ruined his plans. His careful extraction from our marriage, his hidden assets, his manufactured narrative painting me as the villain, all of it now exposed. Was I happy? No. I was grieving the death of a marriage I'd invested 2 decades in. I was aching for my daughter whose father had chosen public drama over her milestone moment. I was exhausted from years of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. But beneath that grief and pain, something else was emerging. Strength. Clarity. The quiet certainty that I deserved better than what I'd accepted for so long. I closed my laptop and went inside, locking the door behind me. Something I'd started doing 3 months ago when I first discovered Daniel's betrayal. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, I'd accomplished what I needed. 2. I'd survived the public execution he'd planned. More than survived. I'd turned the tables with nothing more than an envelope and the calm that comes from finally knowing your own worth. As I climbed the stairs to check on Zoe one more time, before bed, I passed the family photos lining the wall. 20 years of memories, captured in perfect poses and practiced smiles. In almost every one, I stood slightly behind Daniel, my body angled toward him, seeking approval. Only in the most recent photos with Zoe had I started standing straight, looking directly at the camera instead of at him. I paused at a photo from Zoe's 5th birthday. My smile didn't reach my eyes. I remembered that day. Daniel had criticized my cake, my decorations, my outfit, until I'd retreated to the bathroom to cry while he played the charming host to our guests. When I emerged, red-eyed but composed, he'd pulled me into this photo, whispering, "Try to look happy for once." I gently took that frame off the wall and set it face down on the hallway table. Tomorrow, I'd start taking down the false narrative, one frame at a time. But tonight, I just needed to remove that one reminder of who I used to be. I peeked into Zoe's room. She was asleep, her graduation cap and tassel on the nightstand beside her. Despite everything, she'd achieved this milestone. Despite the tension, at home, the walking on eggshells, the muffled arguments she pretended not to hear. She'd thrived. I had done that much right, at least. I had created enough stability and love for her to grow strong. As I closed her door softly, I made a promise to myself. The strength I'd found today wouldn't fade tomorrow. The woman who stood calm in the face of public humiliation, who protected her daughter's celebration, who gathered evidence instead of breaking down, that was the real me. The me I'd buried beneath years of doubt and compromise. That woman would face whatever came next, the legal battles, the social fallout, the financial untangling, the co-parenting challenges. She would rebuild, not just survive. And someday, she might even be grateful for the public execution that had finally set her free. I returned to my bedroom, the guest room I'd been quietly sleeping in for months. On the dresser sat a small box I'd kept hidden inside an old textbook from my teaching days. Inside were mementos I'd been collecting, the business card of a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague, a brochure for a women's financial empowerment workshop, printouts of apartment listings near the university where I taught, and a small silver key. I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm. 3 weeks ago, I'd rented a small safe deposit box at a different bank than the one Daniel and I used. Inside that box were copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, the forged prenup, the bank statements showing his systematic withdrawal of our shared assets, the property records for the secret condo, everything. The original documents were in the envelope I'd shown Daniel today, the envelope that had made him go pale with recognition. He knew exactly what it contained. He knew his carefully constructed exit strategy had just collapsed. I placed the key back in the box and closed, sliding it into its hiding place. Then I changed into pajamas, washed my face, and climbed into bed. For the first time in months, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I didn't stare at the ceiling replaying arguments in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said. I didn't check my phone to see if Daniel would come home tonight. Instead, I closed my eyes and felt the strange lightness that comes from no longer carrying someone else's lies. Daniel had tried to destroy me today, to humiliate me in front of everyone. We knew. He'd chosen our daughter's graduation for maximum impact, caring nothing for her feelings or achievement. But he had miscalculated badly. He thought I was still the woman who would crumble under public scrutiny, who would accept blame to keep peace, who would protect his image at the cost of my own dignity. He didn't realize that woman had been disappearing for months, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had been quietly preparing for this moment. As sleep began to claim me, a small smile played at my lips. He had no idea what was coming. The envelope had been just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would show him exactly who I had become in the shadow of his betrayal. Not a victim, not a villain, just a woman who had finally found her voice and her evidence. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The digital clock read 5:17 a.m., too early for anything good. I considered ignoring it, burying my head back under the pillow and pretending yesterday had been just a nightmare. But the vibration continued, insistent and demanding, much like Daniel had been throughout our marriage. With a sigh, I reached for the phone. 17 missed calls, 5 from Daniel, 8 from Elaine, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 from my sister Claire in Chicago. A dozen text messages, 3 voicemails, and an email notification that made my stomach clench. Emergency faculty meeting, 8 a.m., attendance mandatory. The university, of course. News traveled fast in a small town like Lakewood, and a public spectacle at graduation would have reached the dean's office by now. I was an associate professor of psychology, specializing in family dynamics and resilience. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd helped students understand dysfunctional relationship patterns while living in one myself. I set the phone down without reading the texts or listening to the voicemails. They could wait. Right now, I needed coffee and clarity, in that order. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way downstairs. Daniel hadn't come home last night, his side of the closet still perfectly arranged, his electric toothbrush dry in its charger. Part of me felt relief. Another part, the part I was trying to silence, felt the familiar ache of abandonment. 20 years of emotional conditioning doesn't vanish overnight, even when you know the relationship is toxic. I brewed coffee stronger than usual and carried my mug to the back porch, my thinking spot since we'd bought this house 15 years ago. The early morning air felt fresh against my skin, carrying the scent of the lilac bushes I'd planted when Zoe was born. They were in full bloom now, their purple flowers a reminder that beauty can emerge from the smallest beginnings. My thoughts drifted to the day Daniel and I met at a conference in Boston. I was presenting my graduate research on trauma recovery. He was there representing his family's investment firm. He'd asked such insightful questions during my session, had seemed so genuinely interested in my work. Later, over dinner, he'd told me I was the most intelligent woman he'd ever met. I'd blushed, unused to such direct compliments. That feeling, of being truly seen and valued for my mind, had been intoxicating. When had it changed? When had his admiration turned to criticism, his interest to control? The shift had been so gradual I hadn't noticed until I was drowning in his disapproval. A soft sound from behind me interrupted my thoughts. Zoe stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. At 18, she looked so much like me at that age. Same. Dark curls, same questioning eyes. But she had her father's height and confidence. "Morning, Mom," she said quietly, joining me on the porch swing. "Is Dad?" "Not here," I answered, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Probably at Grandma Elaine's." She nodded, staring out at the yard. "Everyone's texting me, asking?" "What happened?" "There are videos online." Her voice cracked slightly. My heart sank. "I'm so sorry, honey. This isn't what I wanted for your graduation day." "It's not your fault," she said fiercely, surprising me with her certainty. "I saw the way he pointed at you, how he tried to make everything your fault. He's been doing that my whole life, Mom." I stared at her, stunned by her perception. We'd never openly discussed the dynamics of my relationship with Daniel. I'd thought I'd protected her from it. "You knew?" She gave me a look that was half pity, half exasperation. "Mom, I'm a psychology professor's daughter. You taught me about gaslighting in middle school." Despite everything, I laughed. "I did, didn't I? Remember when I was 14 and Dad said you never wanted to go on family vacations, but you always seemed sad when he planned trips just with me?" I knew something wasn't right. She took a deep breath. "What I don't understand is why now? Why at my graduation?" I sipped my coffee, considering how much to share. She was 18, legally, an adult, but still my child. "Your father has been planning his exit for a while. The evidence I've gathered suggests he's been moving assets, setting up a separate life. I think he wanted to control the narrative before I could expose what he's done." "The envelope?" she asked. I nodded. "Documentation, bank statements, property records, things that contradict the story he's been creating." "And he saw it and freaked out," she concluded. "Classic narcissistic injury response." This time, my laugh was genuine. "You really are my daughter." We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us. Then Zoe spoke again, her voice smaller. "What happens now, Mom?" The question hung in the morning air. What happens now? After a public implosion, after years of quiet manipulation, after the carefully constructed facade of our family had shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Now," I said, squeezing her shoulder, "we rebuild. Honestly this time." My phone buzzed again inside the house. The real world wouldn't wait much longer. "I have an emergency faculty meeting this morning," I told Zoe. "After that, I need to see my lawyer. Would you be okay staying with Aunt Maggie today? Just until I sort some things out?" Maggie was my oldest friend, practically family, who lived just a few blocks away. She'd been my quiet confidant through the worst of my marriage troubles. "I could come with you," Zoe offered. "To the lawyer, I mean. I'm not a kid anymore." I studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. When had my little girl become this strong young woman? "Let me handle the initial meeting," I said gently. "But yes, you'll be part of this process. I promise not to keep you in the dark." She seemed satisfied with that answer. We went inside to prepare for the day ahead, moving around each other in the familiar morning dance we'd perfected over years. As I dressed for my meeting, choosing a simple but professional navy dress and low heels, I steeled myself for the public aftermath of Daniel's outburst. The university campus was unusually busy for summer break, cars filling the faculty lot. I recognized most of them, colleagues who had attended the graduation ceremony yesterday, who had witnessed my humiliation, who were now gathering to discuss. What? My fitness to teach? The scandal's effect on the university's reputation? Dean Richards met me outside the conference room, her expression a careful mask of professional concern. "Vanessa, thank you for coming. I want you to know this meeting is primarily informational. We've received numerous calls from parents and donors regarding yesterday's Incident. I nodded, appreciating her discretion even as I braced for what was coming. I understand. I'm prepared to address their concerns. She studied me for a moment, perhaps surprised by my composure. Are you all right? The university has resources, counseling services, legal aid through our employee assistance program. Thank you, Margaret. I've already engaged my own attorney. I managed a small smile. As for counseling, I've been seeing Dr. Bennett for the past 3 months. Something like respect flickered in her eyes. I see. Well, let's get this over with, shall we? The conference room fell silent as I entered. 15 faces turned toward me. Department heads, senior faculty, the university's public relations director, and the head of campus security. I recognized the expression on most of their faces. Awkward pity mixed with morbid curiosity. Only my department chair, Robert, offered a genuinely supportive nod. I took a seat at the middle of the long table, deliberately not hiding at the end. Dean Richards began with a clinical summary of what had occurred, followed by an explanation of the university's concerns about potential media attention and parent reactions. When she finished, she turned to me. Professor Bennett, would you like to address the faculty? I took a deep breath and stood, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my hands. What happened yesterday was not a random outburst. It was a calculated attempt by my husband to control a narrative that is rapidly unraveling around him. My voice grew stronger with each word. For those wondering about the professional implications, I want to be clear. I have documentation proving financial misconduct and identity fraud committed by Daniel. Documentation I've already shared with the authorities. Murmurs circulated around the table. I continued before they could interrupt. I understand the university's concern about its reputation. To that end, I've prepared a brief statement for the PR department to use if approached by media. I slid a folder across to the PR director. It acknowledges the incident without details, emphasizes the university's support for faculty facing personal difficulties, and redirects focus to the achievements of our graduates. The PR director looked impressed as he scanned my prepared statement. Additionally, I continued, I've arranged for a colleague from State University to cover my summer seminar for the next 2 weeks. This will give the administration time to determine if my personal situation presents any genuine concerns about my professional capabilities. Dean Richards exchanged glances with Robert. That won't be necessary, Vanessa. Your teaching record is exemplary. Nevertheless, I insisted, gently, I believe it's in everyone's best interest. My students deserve my full attention, and resolving the immediate legal matters will require some flexibility. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but the tension had dissipated. By the time we adjourned, I had managed to transform myself from a victim of public humiliation to a colleague handling a difficult situation with professionalism and foresight. As we filed out, several faculty members approached to offer quiet words of support. Robert walked me to my car. You've been preparing for this, he observed. Not a question, but a realization. For longer than I care to admit, I acknowledged. When you spend years studying family dynamics and trauma responses, you eventually recognize the patterns in your own life. He nodded thoughtfully. If you need anything, schedule adjustments, reference letters, a witness to his behavior. On campus. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched. Right now, what I need most is normalcy at work. One stable foundation while the rest shifts. As I drove to my lawyer's office, I thought about foundations, how Daniel had systematically undermined mine for years, chipping away at my confidence, my independence, my sense of reality. The classic signs had been there. The constant criticism disguised as just trying to help you improve, the subtle isolation from friends and family, the rewriting of events so I questioned my own memory, the financial control masked as being good with money. I'd recognized these red flags in other people's relationships. I'd written academic papers about them. Yet I'd missed or ignored them in my own marriage until they became too obvious to deny. The law office of Patricia. Winters was housed in a renovated Victorian on the edge of downtown. Patricia had been my student years ago before she went to law school, and we'd stayed in loose contact over the years. 3 months ago, when I'd first discovered the separate bank account, she was the one I'd called. Her assistant showed me, directly to her office, where Patricia rose to greet me with a hug instead of a handshake. "I saw the video," she said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "Getting there," I replied honestly. "But we need to move quickly now. He's exposed his hand, and he'll be scrambling to cover his tracks." She gestured for me to sit, then pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday and what you're most concerned about him doing next." For the next hour, I detailed everything: the graduation confrontation, the evidence I'd gathered, my concerns about Daniel trying to empty accounts or manipulate Zoe. Patricia took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping me to clarify details. "The forged prenup is particularly troubling," she said, examining the copy I'd brought. "This goes beyond typical divorce deception into potential criminal territory. Are you prepared to pursue that angle if necessary?" I hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I've spent too long protecting him from consequences. I won't do it anymore." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, let's talk strategy. Based on what you've shown me, we have grounds for an emergency court order freezing all marital assets pending divorce proceedings. We can file for temporary exclusive use of the house, especially given that Zoe will be living there, and we should document any further contact from Daniel or his mother." "Speaking of contact," I said, pulling out my phone, "he's left several messages I haven't listened to yet." "Let's hear them," Patricia suggested, placing her recorder near my phone. "Anything he says now could be valuable." I played the first voicemail on speaker. Daniel's voice filled the room, slurred and angry. "You think you're so smart with your little envelope. You've ruined everything I've worked for. Everything. You'll regret this, Vanessa. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Patricia raised an eyebrow but said nothing as the second message began. This time, Daniel sounded calmer, calculating. "Look, things got out of hand yesterday. We both said things we didn't mean. Call me back so we can discuss this like adults. There's no need to involve lawyers or air our private business." The third voicemail was from Elaine. "Vanessa, this ridiculous drama you've created has gone far enough. Daniel has always provided well for you and Zoe, and this is how you repay him? By humiliating him publicly? Call him immediately and fix this before it becomes something you can't take back." Patricia stopped the recording. Classic manipulation tactics. First threats, then false reasonableness, then enlisting others to apply pressure. She made another note. "Have you changed the locks on your house?" "Not yet. It's on my list for today." "Make it priority 1, she advised. "And set up cameras. Doorbell, exterior at minimum. Document everything from this point forward." By the time I left Patricia's office 2 hours later, we had a comprehensive plan in place. Emergency court filings were being prepared. A financial forensic specialist had been engaged to trace Daniel's hidden assets. A counselor who specialized in high-conflict divorce had been recommended for both Zoe and me. I felt lighter than I had in months, despite the challenges ahead. Having a concrete plan, expert guidance, and the truth on my side gave me a sense of control I'd been missing for too long. On the drive to Maggie's to pick up Zoe, I took a detour past the small lake where Daniel and I had gotten engaged 21 years ago. I parked at the overlook and sat for a few minutes, watching the sunlight dance across the water. I thought about the young woman I'd been then, 26, brilliant in my field but naive about love, thrilled that this handsome, successful man saw something special in me. I didn't blame her for saying yes when Daniel knelt with a ring too large for my academic salary. She couldn't have known how that fairy tale beginning would slowly transform into a psychological prison. But I didn't pity her either. That young woman had survived. She had built a career, raised a remarkable daughter, and finally found the strength to recognize the truth of her situation. Every version of me, past, present, and future, deserved better than what Daniel had offered. And now, I was finally in a position to claim it. My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Dr. Bennett? This is Sandra from Lakewood Community Bank." The voice sounded hesitant, professional but concerned. "I apologize for calling your personal number, but there's a situation regarding your accounts that requires immediate attention." My stomach tightened. What kind of situation? "Your husband is currently at our main branch attempting to withdraw all funds from your joint accounts and close your safety deposit box. Given the unusual nature of his behavior, our manager thought it prudent to contact you before proceeding." I closed my eyes briefly, grateful for small-town relationships. The bank manager, Helen, had been in my evening psychology class last year. "Sandra, please tell Helen I'm extremely grateful for the call. Those accounts should be frozen pending legal proceedings. My attorney will be faxing the necessary documentation within the hour." "I'll let her know right away, Dr. Bennett." I called Patricia immediately, then headed to Maggie's house to collect Zoe. The day that had started with uncertainty was rapidly filling with purposeful action. Daniel had made his move, just as we'd anticipated. But this time, I was one step ahead. As I pulled into Maggie's driveway, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken or defeated. Her eyes were clear, her jaw set with determination. She looked like someone I was just getting to know, someone I might actually like. Maggie's front door opened before I could knock. She stood there in her paint-splattered overalls, gray hair pulled into her signature messy bun, arms crossed over her chest like she was containing an explosion. 25 years of friendship had given her an almost supernatural ability to read my emotional state. "Your daughter stress-baked 24 cookies and reorganized my linen closet," she announced without preamble. "That's definitely your influence. Daniel would have bought new linens and hired someone to install custom shelving." Despite everything, I laughed. Maggie had never been Daniel's biggest fan, though she'd kept her opinions mostly to herself, out of respect for my choices. Now the gloves were clearly off. "How is she really?" I asked, stepping inside the cozy craftsman bungalow that always smelled like turpentine and cinnamon. Maggie was an art teacher at the local community center, specializing in helping trauma survivors express themselves through painting. Angry, confused, surprisingly clear-headed. Maggie led me through to her sunroom studio, where Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old photographs. She found my box of pictures from our college days, been going through them. For hours. Zoe looked up as we entered, her eyes brighter than they'd been this morning. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me you had purple hair in college?" I smiled, sitting down beside her on the paint-stained rug. "Your father always said it was my unfortunate experimental phase." "It was magnificent," Maggie corrected. "You turned heads everywhere we went. The brilliant psychology major with the punk rock aesthetic and manifestos about dismantling patriarchal relationship models." Zoe held up a faded photograph. Me at 20, arm in arm with Maggie outside our dorm, purple hair spiked defiantly, wearing ripped jeans and a t-shirt emblazoned with "Question Everything." "This is who you were?" Zoe asked, wonder in her voice. "Before Dad?" The question hit me with unexpected force. Before Dad. As if my life were divided into distinct epochs. Before Daniel. With Daniel. After Daniel. And perhaps it was. Part of who I was, I answered carefully. We all contain multitudes, Zoe. Some parts get emphasized, others minimized, depending on our circumstances. And some parts get suffocated entirely, Maggie muttered, not quite under her breath. I shot her a look, but she just shrugged unapologetically. What? She challenged. Are we still pretending he didn't systematically crush every spontaneous, passionate, non-conforming atom in your being? Because if so, I missed the memo. Maggie, I warned, glancing at Zoe. No, Mom, she's right, Zoe said, surprising me. She held up another photo, me defending my master's thesis, standing confidently at a podium. This is the mom I glimpse sometimes when Dad's on business trips, the one who taught me to question authority and trust my instincts. Then he'd come home, and you'd get smaller. Her perception stung precisely because it was accurate. I had become smaller in Daniel's presence, quieter, more cautious, less certain. The transformation had been so gradual I'd barely noticed it happening, like a frog in slowly heating water. I'm sorry, I said softly. I thought I was shielding you from the tension. I didn't realize you could see through it. Kids always know, Maggie said gently. They might not have the vocabulary for it, but they feel the undercurrents. Zoe set down the photos and looked at me directly. What happened to her? She tapped the image of my younger self. The purple-haired girl with the manifestos? I thought about the question, really considered it beyond the easy, deflecting answers I might have given in the past. She's still here, I said finally. Parts of her got buried under layers of compromise and second-guessing. But yesterday, when your father tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, I felt her wake up. Maggie smiled. Well, she's got perfect timing, because you're going to need her fire for what's coming. What is coming? Zoe asked, looking between us. I took a deep breath. A fight. Your father tried to empty our bank accounts this morning. Zoe's eyes widened. He what? Fortunately, the bank called me first. Patricia, my lawyer, has filed emergency orders to freeze everything until we can sort it out legally. I took her hand. I want to be transparent with you, Zoe. This is going to get messy before it gets better. Your father isn't going to just walk away quietly. She squeezed my hand. I'm not a child, Mom. You don't have to protect me from the truth anymore. Those words, so simple, so profound, broke something open inside me. For 18 years, I'd been trying to protect Zoe from the reality of her father's behavior, from the dysfunction in our marriage, from my own unhappiness. I'd created an elaborate facade, believing it was for her benefit. But in doing so, I'd modeled something dangerous. Silent endurance of mistreatment. You're right, I acknowledged. No more sugarcoating, no more pretending. From now on, age-appropriate, honesty. Maggie clapped her hands together. Excellent. Now that we've established a new era of truth-telling, let's start with this. Both of you are staying here tonight. Daniel knows where you live, Vanessa, and he's just had his public mask ripped off. Men like him are most dangerous when they're exposed. I started to protest. I had security measures to implement at home, documents to organize. But Zoe cut me off. Please, Mom, just for tonight. I don't want to be at the house. The vulnerability in her voice decided it. Okay, but tomorrow, we reclaim our space with new locks and security cameras. Maggie nodded approvingly. And a visit from my brother, the ex-cop who now does private security. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange combination of crisis management and unexpected moments of joy. I spoke with Patricia 3 more times, each call bringing news of Daniel's increasingly desperate attempts to access our assets. Trying. Other bank branches, calling investment firms, even attempting to list our house with a realtor who, thankfully, verified ownership before proceeding. Between these disruptions, however, Zoe and I talked more openly than we had in years. She shared her observations about Daniel's controlling behaviors, instances I hadn't realized she'd noticed. How he'd subtly undermined my professional accomplishments in front of her. How he'd rewritten family stories to center himself. How he'd played the role of fun parent while painting me as the uptight rule enforcer. "Remember my 16th birthday?" she asked as we helped Maggie prepare dinner. "How Dad bought me those concert tickets after you'd said we couldn't afford them with college savings being the priority." I nodded, the memory still sharp. "He presented them at your party, made a big show of being the hero." "What you don't know," Zoe continued, chopping vegetables with precise strokes, "is that he told me you'd wanted to get me something practical and boring instead. Said he had to fight for me to have any fun in my life." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "Zoe, I know that now," she interrupted. "But at 16? I believed him. I thought you were the problem." She set down the knife and faced me. "That's why I was so angry with you that whole year. He was triangulating us, and I didn't see it." "Divide and conquer," Maggie muttered from the stove. "Classic abuser tactic." I winced at the word abuser. Even now, after everything, part of me wanted to protest that label, to say Daniel wasn't abusive, just difficult, just misunderstood. The programming ran deep. "It's okay to call it what it was, Mom," Zoe said softly, reading my expression. "Emotional abuse leaves scars, too. They're just harder to see." In that moment, my daughter became my teacher. The wisdom in her young face humbled me completely. "When did you get so insightful?" I asked, blinking back unexpected tears. She smiled wryly. "Therapy. I've been seeing the school counselor since junior year. Dad didn't know." Another secret, another layer of our fractured family dynamics revealed. But instead of feeling hurt that she hadn't told me, I felt proud of her resourcefulness, her determination to find support when home couldn't provide it. "I'm so sorry you needed that," I said, "and so glad you found it." Dinner was simple, but comforting. Pasta with fresh vegetables and garlic bread. We ate at Maggie's eclectic dining table, mismatched chairs pulled close, wine for the adults, and sparkling cider for Zoe. For the first time in longer than I could remember, mealtime wasn't punctuated by Daniel's subtle criticisms or tense silences. We talked, we laughed, we remembered who we were before fear and performance became our daily companions. After dinner, as Zoe helped Maggie load the dishwasher, my phone lit up with a text. "Daniel, I know where you are. Your childish hiding won't change anything. I'll be at the house tomorrow at 9 a.m. to collect my things. Be there or I'll call the police to report you've abandoned the property." I showed the message to Maggie, who snorted derisively. "Perfect. Frank will be there at 8:30. Frank was her brother, the security specialist. Let's see how brave Daniel feels with a 6'4" former SWAT officer monitoring his packing." I forwarded the text to Patricia, who responded immediately. "Documented. Frank is an excellent idea. I'll have a courier bring the temporary restraining order to the house by 8:15 a.m. Do not engage with him directly." The pieces were falling into place. Tomorrow would be challenging, but I wouldn't face it alone or unprepared. For tonight, in this safe haven created by decades of friendship, I could breathe. Later, after Zoe had gone to bed in Maggie's spare room, my friend and I sat on her back porch, sipping tea and watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said after a comfortable silence. "That moment yesterday, when he stood up and started shouting. There was this split second where I felt this wave of familiar shame and panic. The what did I do wrong? Now? Reaction I've had for years." Maggie listened, giving me space to process. "But then," I continued, "something shifted. I felt this strange calm wash over me, like I was finally seeing the situation clearly. Not as his wife, not as Zoe's mother, but as myself. the woman who's spent her career studying psychological manipulation and trauma recovery. Professional detachment, Maggie observed. Your academic training kicked in. Exactly. I saw him not as my husband having a breakdown, but as a textbook case of narcissistic rage triggered by loss of control. I shook my head, still amazed by the clarity of that moment. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. Everything, our entire marriage, suddenly made sense in a different context. That's the moment healing begins, Maggie said softly. When the fog lifts and you can name what's happening to you. I nodded, watching a particularly bright firefly trace patterns against the darkened trees. The strangest part is that I don't feel devastated. Shouldn't I be devastated? 20 years of marriage imploding spectacularly in public? Maggie considered this. Grief isn't just for good things lost, Van. Sometimes it's for the energy wasted, the years spent trying to fix something that was designed to be broken. She reached over and squeezed my hand. And sometimes what feels like devastation is actually relief in disguise. Relief? Yes, that was part of what I was feeling. Relief that the pretending was over, that the constant vigilance could finally ease, that the narrative I'd been maintaining at such personal cost had crumbled beyond repair. What if I can't do this? I whispered, giving voice to the fear lurking beneath my newfound resolve. What if he wins? What if I'm not strong enough? Maggie turned to face me, her expression fierce in the porch light. Vanessa Marie Bennett, you survived 2 decades with a man who chipped away at your self-worth daily. You raised a brilliant, insightful daughter despite his attempts to turn her against you. You built a respected career while walking on eggshells at home. You're already doing this. You've been strong enough all along. Her words sank into me, a truth I needed to hear. I hadn't just been passive or weak. I'd been surviving, adapting, protecting what mattered most. Besides, she added with a glint in her eye, you're not alone anymore. You've got me, Patricia, Frank, your department chair, and most importantly, Zoe. We're your war council now. War council. The phrase should have felt melodramatic, but it didn't. This was a battle for my financial security, for my relationship with my daughter, for my very sense of self. And unlike the invisible daily struggles of my marriage, this fight would happen in the open, with witnesses and allies. Morning came too quickly. I woke on Maggie's sofa to the smell of coffee and the sound of low voices in the kitchen. Maggie and Frank were already strategizing, heads bent over mugs at the counter. Frank looked exactly as I remembered from previous brief meetings. Tall, solid, with kind eyes that belied his intimidating presence. Dr. Bennett, he greeted, me formally. Maggie's filled me in on the situation. I want to assure you that my role today is strictly observational unless your safety is directly threatened. His professionalism was reassuring. Thank you for doing this, Frank. It's my job, he said simply, but it's also personal. My sister thinks the world of you, and I've been hearing about your husband's challenging behavior for years. I glanced at Maggie, who shrugged unapologetically. I kept the worst of it to myself, but yeah, Frank knows Daniel's no prize. We arrived at my house at precisely 8:20 a.m. Patricia's courier had already come and gone, leaving a large envelope taped to the front door, the temporary restraining order limiting Daniel's access to the property and prohibiting him from removing anything beyond personal clothing and toiletries without court approval. Frank did a perimeter check while I gathered my courage on the front steps. This was my home, the place where I'd raised my daughter, prepared my lectures, planted gardens, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. Yet standing there, key in hand, I felt like a trespasser about to break in. Mom! Zoe's voice came from behind me. She'd insisted on coming despite my concerns. We don't have to do this alone. We. Such a simple word, but it nearly undid me. For so long, I'd felt fundamentally alone, even when surrounded by family. Now, facing the most challenging confrontation of my adult life, I was part of a we that had nothing to do with Daniel. I unlocked the door and we entered together. The house felt different somehow, the energy altered by knowledge that couldn't be unlearned, by boundaries that hadn't existed yesterday. Frank took up position in the living room, professional and unobtrusive. Maggie went to put on coffee, moving through my kitchen with the ease of long friendship. At precisely 8:55 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Not Daniel's luxury SUV, but Elaine's silver Mercedes. They were approaching this as a united front, mother and son against me. The predictability was almost comforting. "You okay?" Frank asked quietly. I nodded, straightening my spine. Better than okay. The doorbell rang at 8:59, 1 minute early. Daniel's passive-aggressive way of demonstrating punctuality as moral superiority. I opened the door but remained in the threshold, blocking entry. Daniel stood on the porch, dressed impeccably as always in designer casual wear that cost more than a month of my university salary. Elaine hovered behind him, her expression a careful mask of concerned disapproval. "You're not entering until you've read this," I said calmly, handing him the restraining order. His face darkened as he scanned the document. "This is ridiculous. I'm here to collect my belongings from my house." "The court disagrees with your assessment of the situation," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You may enter to collect essential personal items only: clothing, toiletries, medications. Everything else stays until the court determines equitable distribution of assets." "This is my house!" he snapped, color rising in his cheeks. "Paid for with my money." "Actually," I corrected, "it's our house, purchased with marital funds, and I have documentation showing my contributions to the mortgage over 20 years. His gaze shifted beyond me, landing on Frank's imposing figure in the living room. "Who the hell is that?" "Security," I answered simply. "He'll be observing to ensure compliance with the court order." Elaine stepped forward, inserting herself into the conversation. "Vanessa, this hostility is completely unnecessary. Daniel came here in good faith. After attempting to empty our joint accounts yesterday," I interrupted, "after publicly humiliating me at our daughter's graduation, after creating a forged prenuptial agreement. Your definition of good faith needs revision, Elaine." Her eyes widened slightly at the mention of the forgery. She hadn't known, or at least hadn't known I knew. Interesting. Daniel pushed past me into the foyer, but stopped short when Frank stepped forward. "Sir," Frank said with professional detachment, "I'm here to ensure this process follows the court's guidelines. You're permitted to collect personal essentials only. I'll need to document anything you remove from the premises." Daniel looked like he might explode, but Elaine laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Daniel, not now," she murmured. "Let's just get your things." The next 45 minutes were excruciating but controlled. Daniel stomped upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and began throwing clothes into suitcases. I followed at a distance, Frank close behind, as Daniel systematically went through closets and drawers. When he reached for his laptop and the small safe in his office, Frank cleared his throat. "Those items aren't covered under personal essentials, sir. They'll need to remain until the court rules otherwise." Daniel's face contorted with rage. "That computer has all my client information. I need it for work." "You should have considered that before attempting to drain joint accounts," I said quietly. "Your office computer should have everything you need professionally. This one stays." He turned on me then, stepping close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "You think you're so clever with your lawyer and your paperwork. You're nothing without me, Vanessa. Nothing. I made you. I can break you just as easily." I didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, I looked directly into his eyes, the eyes I'd once found so captivating, now cold with fury and fear. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "You never made me. You just convinced me I was smaller than I am. That mistake ends today." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, at not encountering the accommodating, conflict-avoidant woman he'd trained me to be. Before he could respond, Zoe appeared in the doorway. "Dad?" she said, her voice steady despite the tension vibrating through the room. "I think you should go now." Daniel's expression shifted instantly, the rage masked by the concerned father persona he'd perfected. "Zoe, sweetheart, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. Your mother is clearly going through something." "Stop it," Zoe interrupted, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard her use with him. "Just stop. I was there yesterday. Everyone was there. You chose to humiliate Mom publicly, and now you're trying to gaslight us both." The clinical term, gaslight, seemed to hit Daniel physically. He actually took a step back. "That's not—" "What happened?" he began. But Zoe wasn't finished. "It's exactly what happened, and it's what's been happening for years. The difference is now we see it clearly." She glanced at me, solidarity in her eyes. Both of us. In that moment, I felt a surge of love and pride so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. My daughter, standing in her truth, refusing to be manipulated. Whatever mistakes I'd made, whatever damage had been done, this fierce young woman was proof that something had gone very right. Daniel looked between us, calculation replacing rage. He was reassessing, realizing that his usual tactics weren't working. Finally, he turned to Frank. "I'll have my attorney contact the court about my property," he said stiffly. "For now, I've taken what I immediately need." Frank nodded professionally. "I've documented everything you're removing, sir. The list will be provided to both attorneys." Daniel grabbed his suitcases and stalked out, Elaine trailing behind with a final glare in my direction. As the front door slammed, the house seemed to exhale around us. "Well," Maggie said from the bottom of the stairs where she'd been listening, "that went better than expected. No one got arrested." The absurdity of it, that this counted as a success, broke the tension. I laughed, and once I started, I couldn't stop. Zoe joined in, then Maggie, until we were all three leaning against walls and furniture, caught in the hysterical release of months, years, of pent-up stress. Only Frank maintained his composure, though his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Ladies, I suggest we proceed with changing the locks while we know he's gone." Still catching my breath, I nodded agreement. "And installing the security cameras, and calling Patricia to report how it went." One by one, we ticked items off the day's crisis management list: new locks, security system, documentation of the house's contents, room by room, in case Daniel returned when we weren't home. But between these necessary tasks, something else was happening: a reclaiming, a restoration, a return to ourselves. As Frank installed the new front door lock, I stood in the kitchen doorway watching Zoe and Maggie make lunch, their movements comfortable and synchronized. The house felt different now, lighter, as if Daniel's departure had altered not just the emotional atmosphere, but the physical space itself. For the first time in 20 years, I could breathe fully in my own home. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't measuring my words, monitoring my expressions, anticipating criticism. The freedom was dizzying. "You look like you've just discovered gravity isn't real," Maggie observed, handing me a sandwich. I smiled, accepting the plate. "Something like that. I'm just realizing. This is really happening. I'm really doing this." "Yes," she agreed, her eyes bright with fierce affection. "You really are." 3 weeks after Daniel's dramatic exit from our lives, I found myself in a familiar yet somehow transformed space, my university office, preparing for the summer seminar I'd almost handed off to a colleague. The room felt different now, infused with a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. I'd moved furniture, hung new artwork, and even painted one wall a bold teal color that would have made Daniel cringe with disapproval. My phone chimed, with a text from Zoe. Finished unpacking my dorm room. Roommate seems cool. Love you, Mom. You got this today. I smiled at her encouragement. Despite everything that had happened, Zoe had insisted on sticking with her original plan to participate in her university's summer bridge program. I'm not putting my life on hold because Dad decided to have a public meltdown, she'd declared, with a determination that both impressed and worried me. But after long conversations and a session with her therapist, I'd agreed it was the right choice for her. For me, returning to teaching felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity that had been slowly eroding under Daniel's subtle undermining. He'd never outright told me to quit. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he'd employed more insidious tactics, scheduling important events during my lecture times, questioning whether my income was worth the stress, suggesting my students didn't respect me as much as I thought they did. A knock at my open door interrupted my thoughts. Dean Richards stood there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Vanessa, do you have a moment? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Of course, Margaret. What can I do for you? She sat, taking in the office changes with raised eyebrows. Redecorating? Reclaiming, I corrected with a small smile. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. That's actually related to why I'm here. The board has been discussing your situation. My stomach tightened. Despite the supportive atmosphere at the emergency faculty meeting, university politics were unpredictable. Had donors complained? Had enrollment in my seminar dropped due to the scandal? I see, I said, keeping my voice neutral. And what have they concluded? Dean Richards leaned forward. They want to offer you the Distinguished Faculty Chair in Psychological Resilience. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. The Distinguished Chair was the highest academic honor our small university bestowed, typically reserved for faculty with decades more experience than I had. That's unexpected, I managed. Is it? She smiled. You're our most published faculty member under 40. Your research on trauma recovery is being cited at major institutions. And frankly, you've just demonstrated remarkable resilience in your personal life. Some would call it a spectacular failure of judgment, I said dryly. Staying in a dysfunctional marriage for 20 years doesn't exactly scream good decision-making. On the contrary, the dean countered. You recognized the situation, gathered evidence methodically, protected your daughter, and extracted yourself with dignity, despite your husband's attempt to publicly humiliate you. If that's not a textbook example of psychological resilience, I don't know what is. Her perspective startled me. I'd been viewing my marriage through the lens of failure, all the red flags I'd missed or ignored, the years spent trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But seen through Richard's eyes, my journey looked different. Not a story of victimhood, but of gradual awakening and ultimately, liberation. The position comes with a significant salary increase, she continued, and reduction in teaching load to focus on research. The board is particularly interested in your work on recovery from covert emotional abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. My most personal pain had become my professional expertise, the very experience I'd been ashamed of, now positioned as valuable insight. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say yes, Richard suggested. The formal announcement would be at the fall faculty convocation, but you could begin the research component immediately. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Robert mentioned your book proposal. The university press is very interested. After she left, I sat, in stunned silence trying to process this unexpected turn. The book proposal had been my secret project for months, a work on recognizing and recovering from emotional manipulation, combining academic research with accessible guidance for non-academics. I'd shown it to Robert in confidence, never imagining it might actually be published. My computer pinged with an email notification, pulling me from my thoughts. Patricia's name appeared in the sender field, the subject line simply, "Update important." The email was brief but significant. Judge granted our motion for comprehensive financial discovery. Daniel has 10 days to provide complete documentation of all accounts, properties, and investments. His request for access to the house was denied pending full disclosure. Call me when you can. Another victory in the ongoing legal chess match. Daniel had been fighting the financial discovery process aggressively, claiming my requests were vindictive fishing expeditions. His attorney, an old fraternity brother who specialized in corporate law, not family matters, had drastically underestimated Patricia's meticulous preparation and my documentation. As I reached for my phone to call Patricia, it rang in my hand, an unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Dr. Bennett? This is Andrea Lawson from Channel 7 News. We're doing a special report on hidden financial abuse in marriage, and your case has come to our attention. Would you be willing to speak with us about your experience?" The request blindsided me. I'd been so focused on navigating the legal process privately that I hadn't considered the broader implications of our story. "How exactly did my case come to your attention?" I asked cautiously. "Several students posted videos of your husband's outburst at the graduation ceremony," she explained. But what caught our producer's interest was the court filing regarding the forged prenuptial agreement. Financial abuse is rarely discussed in the media, and your story could help other women recognize warning signs. My immediate instinct was to decline, to protect what privacy remained, to shield Zoe from further exposure, to avoid antagonizing Daniel more than necessary. But as the journalist continued explaining their approach, a different perspective emerged. How many women were trapped in situations similar to mine, believing they were alone, unaware that their partner's financial control was a recognized form of abuse? "I need to think about this," I said finally, "and discuss it with my daughter and my attorney. Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Of course," Andrea replied. "And Dr. Bennett, whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you're doing, standing up for yourself after years of manipulation, that's incredibly brave." Her words stayed with me as I taught my seminar that afternoon, a 3-hour intensive on cognitive frameworks for processing trauma. Looking at the 20 graduate students taking notes, asking insightful questions, sharing their own professional experiences, I wondered how many had personal connections to the material we were discussing. How many had survived their own versions of what I'd endured? After class, a student named Melissa lingered, helping me gather materials. She'd been unusually quiet during the discussion, though normally one of my most engaged participants. "Everything okay, Melissa?" I asked as we organized the room. She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "My sister is going through something that sounds a lot like what you described today, the normalization of mistreatment, the gradual erosion of independence. She doesn't see it, but it's tearing our family apart watching her disappear into this relationship." I set down the papers I was holding, giving her my full attention. "That must be incredibly difficult for all of you." "It is," she agreed, blinking back tears. "We try to talk to her, but he's always there, monitoring her calls, checking her texts. And when we do get her alone, she defends him, says we don't understand how much he loves her." The familiar pattern made my heart ache. You know, the hardest thing about these situations is that no one can force awareness. It has to come from within. "So we just watch her suffer?" Melissa asked, frustration evident in her voice. I thought carefully before answering. No, you stay present. You maintain connection however you can. You avoid ultimatums or judgments. That might push her further away. And you have resources ready for when, not if, but when, she begins to question her reality. Melissa nodded slowly. Like what happened for you? The personal reference surprised me. I hadn't shared my story with my students, though rumors had undoubtedly circulated after the graduation incident. Yes, I acknowledged simply. Like, what happened for me? How did you know? She asked. When did you finally see it clearly? It was a profound question, one I'd been asking myself for months. There wasn't a single moment, I said thoughtfully. There were glimpses of awareness. I pushed away because the full truth was too frightening to face. But I started keeping notes, small inconsistencies in his stories, financial documents that didn't make sense, the contrast between how I felt when he was away versus when he was home. Evidence, Melissa said. Exactly. Evidence that eventually couldn't be explained away or minimized. I gathered my belongings, sensing she needed this conversation to continue outside the formal classroom setting. Would you like to grab coffee? We could talk more about resources for your sister. Over the next hour at a quiet corner table in the campus cafe, our conversation evolved from Melissa's sister to broader questions about recognizing and responding to relationship patterns that damage rather than nurture. Other students spotted us and joined briefly, the informal gathering growing organically into something that felt important. A space where personal experience and academic knowledge merged, where theory became lived reality. Walking home that evening, I realized I'd made a decision about the news interview without consciously deliberating. If my story could help even one person recognize their situation sooner than I had, how could I justify keeping it private? The shame wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to Daniel and the systems that had enabled his behavior. I called Zoe first, wanting her input before making any final decisions. A TV interview? She echoed when I explained the request. About the financial stuff, not just Dad's graduation meltdown? That's right. They're focusing on financial control as a form of domestic abuse, how it often goes unrecognized because it's not physical. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Would you use our real names? I wouldn't have to, I said. They offered anonymity if we prefer. No, she said firmly, surprising me. Use your real name. Use mine too. I'm tired of secrets, Mom. Secrets protect the wrong people. Her certainty touched something deep in me. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, she replied softly. One who finally started practicing what she preached. After talking with Patricia, who approved with the caveat that I avoid discussing certain details of the ongoing legal proceedings, I called Andrea back and agreed to the interview, scheduled for the following week. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching fireflies appear in the gathering darkness. A summer ritual I'd always loved, but had often missed during my marriage. Daniel had preferred evenings inside with precisely controlled climate settings, deeming the porch too buggy despite the screening. My phone lit up with a text from an unfamiliar number. I heard about the interview. You've gone too far this time. Some things should stay private. Elaine. Of course she'd have sources at the local news station. Her charity work had put her in those circles for years. I didn't bother responding. Her opinion had lost its power to affect me. Instead, I opened my laptop and returned to the book proposal Robert had submitted to the university press. Reading it now, I could see places where I'd still been hedging, using academic language to create distance from the personal reality underlying the research. With fresh eyes and newfound conviction, I began revising, replacing abstract constructions with direct statements, infusing the scholarly framework with authentic experience. As I wrote, memories surfaced, not just of the obvious breaking points in my marriage, but of the subtle moments that should have been warnings. The way Daniel had insisted on handling all financial matters from the beginning, claiming his business background made him better suited for it. How he'd framed joint decisions as generous concessions on his part. The gradual disappearance of my name from accounts and titles without clear explanation. There had been early resistors in my life. People who had seen what I couldn't. My sister Claire, who had questioned Daniel's charm from their first meeting. My graduate school mentor, who had expressed concern about my diminishing professional ambitions after marriage. Maggie, who had maintained a patient presence through years of witnessing my slow erasure. I'd dismissed their concerns as misunderstandings, or jealousy. Now I recognized their perceptions as the clear-eyed observations of people who hadn't been gradually conditioned to doubt their own reality. My phone chimed again. Another text, this one from Maggie. Just heard about the interview. From Frank, who heard from his police buddy who dates Andrea's cameraman. Small town. Need moral support for the filming? I make an excellent hype woman. I smiled, typing back. Absolutely. Bring wine and your unfiltered commentary. 3 days later, Andrea and her crew arrived at my house for the interview. I'd chosen to film there deliberately, reclaiming the space that had once been the site of my diminishment as the backdrop for my truth-telling. Maggie arrived an hour early, helping me rearrange furniture and select an outfit that struck the right balance between professional and approachable. Not the navy, she insisted when I held up my standard interview suit. Too safe, too much like the old Vanessa who didn't want to stand out. Instead, I chose a vibrant emerald blouse with black pants, colors that would have drawn Daniel's criticism for being attention-seeking. As the crew set up lights and microphones in my living room, I felt surprisingly calm. The nervousness I'd anticipated had been replaced by a quiet certainty that this step, however public and irreversible, was right. Andrea began with gentle questions about my background and career, gradually transitioning to the relationship dynamics that had evolved over 20 years of marriage. I spoke candidly about the subtle shifts, how financial control had intertwined with emotional manipulation, how isolation had happened so gradually I barely noticed it, how gaslighting had made me question my own perceptions. Many people might wonder why you stayed so long, Andrea said, her tone careful but direct. What would you say to them? I'd say that's exactly the wrong question, I replied. It places the responsibility on the person being controlled rather than the one doing the controlling. The better question is, what systems and beliefs enable some people to think they're entitled to dominate others? Andrea nodded thoughtfully. When did you begin to recognize what was happening? I considered the question carefully. Recognition isn't a single moment, it's a process. There were flashes of clarity I immediately doubted or dismissed because the alternative, that I'd spent years in a relationship based on control rather than love, was too painful to face. The full awareness came in layers, each one making the next possible. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering the financial discoveries, the forged prenuptial agreement, the carefully orchestrated separation plan I'd uncovered, through bank statements and property records. And then there was the graduation ceremony, Andrea prompted. Can you tell us about that day? I described the public confrontation with a detachment that surprised even me. How Daniel had chosen that moment for maximum impact, how the envelope of evidence had changed the power dynamic instantly, how his attempt to humiliate me had instead become the catalyst for final liberation. Looking back, Andrea asked, what would you tell other women who might be experiencing similar forms of control but don't recognize it yet? The question struck at the heart of why I'd agreed to the interview. I'd tell them to trust their discomfort, I said after a moment's reflection. Those moments when something feels wrong but you can't quite articulate why, pay attention to them. Write them down. Date them. Look for patterns. I leaned forward slightly, speaking now not to Andrea, but to the unknown viewers who might recognize their own lives in my words. Start with one small act of self-trust. Maybe it's opening a bank account only you know about. Maybe it's reconnecting with a friend your partner doesn't approve of. Maybe it's just admitting to yourself that the way you're being treated isn't okay, even if you're not ready to say it aloud yet. Andrea's eyes were bright with understanding. And if someone is watching this right now, recognizing their situation but feeling trapped by financial dependence, what resources exist? This was where academic knowledge merged with lived experience. I outlined the practical steps: documentation, legal aid resources, domestic violence organizations that addressed financial as well as physical abuse, the importance of secure communication channels. Most importantly, I concluded, know that you're not alone and you're not crazy. Financial abuse affects people across all socioeconomic levels, educational backgrounds, and demographics. It thrives in silence and isolation, which is exactly why I'm speaking out today. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, I felt simultaneously drained and energized. Maggie appeared at my side with a glass of water, squeezing my shoulder in silent support. That was incredibly powerful, Andrea said, reviewing notes while her crew packed equipment. We'll edit this for a 30-minute special, but honestly, there's enough here for a documentary series. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. One step at a time, I said with a smile. After the crew left, Maggie and I collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally spent but oddly peaceful. You know, Daniel and Elaine will lose their minds when this airs, she said, kicking off her shoes. Probably, I agreed. But their reactions don't control me anymore. She studied my face. You really mean that, don't you? You're actually free of their power. Not completely, I admitted. There are still moments when I hear his voice in my head, questioning my decisions, undermining my confidence. But those moments are getting fewer and farther between. Maggie raised her wine glass. To fewer and farther between, until they disappear entirely. I clinked my glass against hers, then set it down as my phone vibrated with an incoming call. Patricia. Vanessa, she said without preamble when I answered. The financial investigator found something. 3 offshore accounts, a property in the Caymans, and a trust in Elaine's name with Daniel as beneficiary. The amounts are substantial. My breath caught. How substantial? Nearly 8 million, Patricia replied, hidden systematically over at least 15 years. The figure was staggering, far beyond what I'd suspected, even in my most cynical moments. 15 years of diversion, of lies, of creating a secret financial life while I worried about college savings and mortgage payments. He'll fight this, I said, mind racing. He'll claim it was his money to begin with, that I wasn't entitled to know about it. Let him try, Patricia said, and I could hear the determination in her voice. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. Hiding assets is a major factor courts consider in property division. This changes everything, Vanessa. After we hung up, I relayed the news to Maggie, who whistled low. 8 million? While he made you justify buying new work clothes? The contrast was indeed stark. I remembered the arguments over my unnecessary spending whenever I purchased professional attire, the meticulous budget spreadsheets he insisted I maintain for household expenses, while he apparently siphoned millions into hidden accounts. But beneath the justified anger, I felt an unexpected emotion. Vindication. My instincts had been right. The discrepancies I'd noticed, the explanations that hadn't quite added up, they hadn't been my imagination or my failure to understand complex finances, as Daniel had always insisted. They had been real clues to a deliberate deception. You know what this means? Maggie asked, interrupting my thoughts. That the divorce will get even uglier? Well, yes, she conceded. But more importantly, it means financial independence, Real freedom to rebuild your life exactly as you want it. Freedom. The word resonated in a way it never had before. Not just freedom from Daniel's control, but freedom to create something new, to make choices based solely on my own values and desires, without the constant calculus of managing his reactions. As the evening deepened into night, Maggie headed home, and I found myself once again on the back porch, listening to the symphony of summer insects and distant wind chimes. The financial revelation should have been shocking, but instead it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, the complete picture of deception now fully visible. My phone lit up with a text from Zoe. Got your message about the offshore accounts. Just wow. Love you, Mom. So proud of you. Those words, so proud of you, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd worried about being a role model for my daughter, about showing her what a strong woman looked like. In trying to maintain a facade of perfect marriage, I'd inadvertently modeled acceptance of mistreatment instead. Now, through the painful but necessary dismantling of that facade, I was finally showing her something true. That it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your power, your sense of self. That the path to authenticity sometimes requires walking through fire, but the freedom on the other side is worth the burns. I typed back, proud of us both. Sleep well. Tomorrow is a new day. And it was, a day without pretense, without fear, without the exhausting vigilance of navigating someone else's unpredictable moods and hidden agendas. A day in which every choice, from the profound to the trivial, would be authentically mine. As stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever challenges the divorce proceedings might bring, whatever tactics Daniel might employ, I would not retreat into the familiar patterns of doubt and accommodation. The woman who had stood calm in the face of public humiliation, who had gathered evidence instead of making excuses, who had spoken her truth to a television camera, that was the real me. And she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.